ตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings to you all. We've come together today and it happens to be the Lunar Observance Day. So in the monastery we practice late into the night, improving our efforts in the practice of meditation. This is a practice we've inherited from our teacher, Ajahn Kalyano. And perhaps he encouraged the Sangha to keep this practice of staying up late or staying up all night on the full moon days, new moon days, half moon days, following in the footsteps of the Buddha himself. As we know, the Buddha practiced all night on the night of his enlightenment. And that was probably something he'd done many, many, many times before he reached that final night of his enlightenment. And it's something that the Buddha encouraged all the time for us to summon up and put forth effort in the practice, because our minds tend to keep drifting away from the Dhamma. Whether it's in one meditation session, as we've just done now, or in our lives, we tend to easily drift away from the Dhamma back towards what you might call the world and get lost in the world so easily. So an occasion where we come together and meditate late into the night, it's going against the stream of the world and it's saying, no, I'm going to put effort into practicing mindfulness, contemplating the Dhamma, and go against some of the desires that may arise, the worldly desires we may have. So the practicing Dhamma does require effort because we're going against the stream, the flow of our desires, but there's a purpose to it, there's a goal, and that is to free our minds from suffering. When we look at a Buddha statue, they encourage us to reflect on three main qualities. The statue of the Buddha is representing the great wisdom of the Buddha, his ability to teach others to understand the truth, particularly the Four Noble Truths. And the great compassion of the Buddha was having understood his own mind and freed it from suffering, he could then teach others how to do it and put his effort into that throughout his life, so displaying his compassion. So wisdom and compassion are kind of two sides of the same thing. And the last quality of the Buddha is the purity of mind. The mind that is free from the causes of suffering, all the mental states rooted in greed, anger, delusion. So the purity, the wisdom, the compassion, these three qualities are what the Buddha symbolizes. And when we begin our practice, whether it's sitting meditation or walking, or when we are just contemplating our life, contemplating things, is one simple way, direct way to bring our mind back to the Dhamma is to just think of the Buddha and what the Buddha symbolizes. The wisdom, the compassion, the purity, freedom from suffering and the causes of suffering. And this is why recollection of the Buddha, Buddhanusati, is such a powerful meditation. It's something that you can always turn to in your life at times when you're feeling anxious, afraid, confused, tired, lazy, stubborn, whatever the particular difficulty is that you're experiencing, to come back to the Buddha as a starting point, recollect the Buddha and the qualities of the Buddha is always a safe refuge and will tend to easily bring up more wholesome states of mind, even if you're facing difficulty, even pain, physical pain, discomfort. So the Buddha said, if you don't know what else to do with your mind at times of crisis or suffering, such as when you're ill or perhaps at the end of your life, think of the Buddha. Recollect the name of the Buddha, Buddha or Buddho, and this will help to clear away at least some of the stress and suffering, and maybe all of it. And your mind can easily enter samadhi by recollecting the Buddha. And we need to keep doing that through our life because our mind tends to fade away and get distracted from the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, under the influence of our environment, the world around us, but on a deeper level, our own craving and attachment, which is the cause of suffering. It keeps re-emerging. Craving or tanha, the Buddha said, it's a river that is the longest river in the world, longer than any other river. It's just endless. It's that quality of mind that's never satisfied, always wanting something more, or wanting to get rid of what it doesn't like. Never satisfied. It's constantly re-emerging in our experience. But when you recollect the Buddha, immediately that gives you a certain strength, a certain presence of mind to start going against the stream of craving, to not give in to every desire, every thought, every mood. Helps us to establish mindfulness, presence of mind, clear comprehension, which is the most vital tools we need for training this mind. There's one time I went to visit Ajahn Buddhadasa, who was a famous meditation master who was a contemporary of Ajahn Chah. Went with some friends, and one of the monks in the group asked him a question. He said, to see the Dhamma and understand the Dhamma, do we have to rely on our good karma and our barami from our last life? And he said, oh, that's too much speculation already. You have to look at the present moment and see suffering arise in the present moment. You have to see the process of paticca samuppada, dependent origination, as it's arising in the present moment. That's the place of practice, the present moment. As human beings, we think too much about the past, or plan and hope too much about the future, and always missing the present moment. He said that's the place of practice, the present moment. And to see whether your mind is free from kilesa, different kinds of thoughts and mental states rooted in greed, anger, delusion, or they're there, they're present. What kilesa is arising? What unwholesome mental state is arising? He said, this is how the Buddha practiced. One of the first things the Buddha did in his practice was to learn the difference between wholesome mental states and unwholesome mental states. And we have to follow in his footsteps. That's a skill we have to learn. When I was a student, I used to work in one of the biggest kitchens in London to earn extra money so I could travel to Thailand, buy a plane ticket. And that kitchen was huge. It was like 1/2 kilometre long, underground. It was the kitchen for the London Council. It was massive, and I had a job there. But I was always impressed by the different skills of the chefs and the people who arranged the food, because when food items came in, the raw ingredients, particularly vegetables and fruit, they were so sharp they could see what fruit was ripe, what fruit was unripe, what fruit was good quality, what was poor quality, with just a glance. They were so quick. And they could make all kinds of decisions based on that knowledge for planning food for huge numbers of people. We can do that in life. We can learn many things, how to choose between good quality, bad quality, different things, different products, fruits, food, stuffs, and all kinds of other things. Clothing, whatever it may be that our interest or our work requires. We can train ourselves to choose, to learn what is the right thing, the wrong thing, the good thing, the bad thing. But we don't do that very well with our own minds, do we? We often are not recognizing a kilesa, a mental state that's unskillful, that's leading to suffering. We often miss it. We don't see it. That's what delusion is. You don't see suffering and the cause of suffering in your own experience. So this is a skill we have to learn, and this is what the Buddha learned and encouraged us to learn. The beginning of our practice is often comes when we have an inkling, at least an inkling or some kind of realization about karma, that there is good karma and there is bad karma. And often people talk about karma just in terms of what we call resultant karma, vibhaka karma. You meet with some problem and you say, oh, it's my bad karma that this has happened. And they're often looking at it from that point of view, just the results of past actions coming up, good or bad. But karma is something we're making in the present moment, at every moment. It's how we respond to the world. And what is the world for us? Well, the world is what we receive through our senses. So sight, sound, taste, touch, smell. And then the thoughts, ideas, memories that come into the mind from moment to moment. All of that is our old resultant karma coming back to us. You see something, you hear something, you feel something in your body. That's old karma, but then the next moment is your new karma, isn't it? How you react at that moment. So Ajahn Buddhadasa used to say, if you want to end suffering, you have to end it right there. And he'd just hammer this point over and over again. You have to build up your strength of mind, the quality of mindfulness, clear comprehension, and understanding of this process, how suffering arises and then how suffering ceases. And how does it cease in the present moment? Well, so you see something and you have enough mindfulness to know I'm seeing, and you may be aware what you're seeing and the perception that arises, person, building, tree, whatever it is you're looking at, computer screen. You have enough mindfulness to know there is seeing taking place. Seeing, we say seeing consciousness arises. And you hold your mindfulness at that point and just let it be just seeing. What we say, just seeing, or just hearing, just smelling, just tasting, just touching, or just a thought arising. But when we're not mindful, what happens? The mind straight away reacts to that seeing, the thing that's seen, the object that's seen, the perception and the feeling that arises, that it's pleasant, unpleasant, good, bad, and straight away we form judgments and values based on that, the perceptions and the feelings, and that is a cause for craving to arise. Where does craving come from? Really, it comes from, we say, avijja, ignorance. Just not knowing, unawareness at that moment of what's going on. Not a clear awareness. There's enough delusion or unawareness there that we just don't see the seeing arising and then craving or forming in our mind based on that experience, what is seen. So craving comes from ignorance, and craving hardens into attachment, clinging, upadana, which manifests bhava, becoming. So we may become happy on seeing something we like, become enraged on seeing something we don't like, or maybe just drift into dullness. If it's something not really relevant to us and not important to us, it may go to dullness as well. It's another form of kilesa. But craving hardens into clinging, becoming, and ultimately birth. But not birth in the sense of being born in your mother's womb. This is birth in the present moment of some clinging, some attachment, and then suffering. Because what follows birth is always aging, sickness and death. But in the present moment, that means the mood, the thought, the mental state that's arisen, and then that's subject to decay, passing away, cessation. But often it brings with it more confusion. Where does avijja, ignorance, come from that causes all this, the process of suffering? Well, that's fed by previous suffering. So it's like a feedback loop. We see something, craving, clinging, becoming arises, birth arises, we're born as happy, excited, attached to the pleasantness of that experience, or aversion, anger arises, if it's an unpleasant experience, and then we're born into that. And that birth is a moment of birth, and then it passes away, it ceases. And you could say even pleasant things that we see and experience, because they're temporary, and we go from birth and into decay, into cessation or death, the whole experience is very unsatisfactory. It doesn't lead to any kind of permanent peace, doesn't lead to wisdom, understanding. It leads to more birth, more ignorance, more craving, more attachment, more birth. So it's a cycle. And Ajahn Buddhadasa says this is just going on from moment to moment through our day. Birth and death, every day we're being born and then we die, born and die. And he would say this is one way you can understand about karma and rebirth, from the present moment. On the level of philosophy, theories of life, and it's very hard to prove what happens after we die, because we haven't died yet. But he'd say that actually your mind is dying away from each mental state every moment. Birth and death is taking place every moment. But the only way you can reveal that to yourself or understand it is bringing up the quality of mindfulness, clear comprehension, and maintain that mindfulness long enough to see what's going on, to observe your own mind. Like someone the other day came and they're experiencing marital problems in their life, and they say, where does this rage come from? You just see your partner do something and just on fire straight away. It's so fast. Where does it come from? Well, the Buddha's already told us. Ajahn Buddhadasa, Ajahn Chah, our teachers have already explained, but they've explained the theory, given us pointers where to look. The rage comes from all kinds of craving, clinging, becoming, and probably cumulative over time. So the wife saw the husband talking to another woman and just went into rage. There's no mindfulness, no awareness, just suffering. It's so quick, it just seems to come out of nowhere. But it's not coming out of nowhere, it's coming from various causes and conditions. At that moment, it wasn't seeing as just seeing. It was seeing, and then with a strong attachment, maybe you might say possessiveness, built up over time, my husband, and then this husband talking to another woman, not yet knowing what they're discussing, what's going on, but with maybe accumulated suspicion, attachment, suspicion, fear, anxiety. Straight away the mind goes to anger, rage. But when there's mindfulness, it could be just seeing, and that whole mood could arise but then collapse and disappear very quickly if mindfulness was present. Probably would be one of the hardest kind of things to be mindful of when you see your partner with another person and you're not sure what's going on. Nevertheless, that's the way out of that kind of suffering. Training in mindfulness, clear comprehension, to look after your own mind and stop it being born into anger at that moment. What we tend to do, isn't it, all the time is when suffering arises, we're attributing it to external things. So at that moment it might be, I'm suffering because my husband is talking to another woman. So that's where the solution is seen. So you maybe walk over and interrupt them, break it up, find out what's going on, display our anger. But that's not really understanding suffering, the cause of suffering in that present moment, is it? It's going outside and quite possibly reacting and creating more karma, negative karma. The better way might be at that moment is to establish mindfulness, however difficult, to be able to see, seeing as just seeing, feeling the emotion that comes up as just feeling. This is what we call the practice of mindfulness, and it's the cessation of suffering in the present moment. That is a very extreme example, but it's going on all the time through our day. Different experiences of pleasure and pain, liking and disliking that we get born into from moment to moment. Quite often nobody else is involved. It's just us on our own, getting caught into our daydreams, memories, and this stimulates different mental defilements. Craving arises, wanting something that we haven't got. Craving has no limits, so there's nothing we can't crave for in this world. And the craving will just move from object to object. So if you're not careful and not watching your mind, well, we think that surfing the net was invented with the internet, but really surfing the net was invented with craving. Because before there was the internet where you can just surf the net endlessly, you could surf your own mental states, fantasies, imagination. And anyone who meditates will know that. If you're meditating and you lose your awareness or you're getting bored, distracted, you'll just sit there surfing your own mental images, memories, images, based on past sense contact, but now regurgitating it, going over it, and maybe constructing fresh images and fresh scenarios and fresh stories. So of course now we have the internet and all the devices to link us to the internet. There's a huge danger now because human beings can just sit there whiling away the hours, surfing from thing to thing, becoming duller and promoting more of their own avijja, their own lack of awareness. So the place where we practice is always the present moment, the here and now. This is where we are receiving karma and then making fresh karma, and our aim is to understand what is good karma and what is bad karma, and make the good and abandon the tendency to make bad karma out of our experience. So to abandon greed, hatred, delusion, and all the offshoots of those mental states, and to develop non-greed, non-anger, non-delusion by bringing up mindfulness, clear comprehension, wisdom. And this is all taking place from moment to moment in our practice, which is why we come together to meditate, listen to Dhamma, is to improve our mindfulness and our ability to see this process of where suffering arises and what to do about it. And we're probably all aware, we've heard one who practices the Satipatthana, practices the four foundations of mindfulness and completes the course, as it were, well, the Buddha said within 7 days they may become Sotapanna, or within 7 months, or within 7 lifetimes. They can become a Sotapanna, a noble one, and ultimately an arahant, enlightened one. But actually, if you bring up mindfulness, you may not yet be 7 days, 7 months, 7 lifetimes that you're reducing your time in samsara, but it may be reducing a little bit of one lifetime. You're undermining the process by which suffering arises, so you're chipping away at the number of future lifetimes you're going to have to live and suffer and experience birth, old age, sickness and death, and then all the problems of living the life of a human, all the trials and tribulations and the challenges. You're reducing that every time you establish mindfulness, and seeing is just seeing, hearing is just hearing. You're reducing the round of birth and death for yourself, your future self, you could say. In Thailand, they have this verse, we call a verse of Dhamma, we call a gatha or gatha in Pali. And they have this one that is used, very commonly heard in monasteries, places of practicing meditation. They call it gatha dap tuk, the verse for the ending of suffering. And it's nothing special. Often people think, oh, I want to hear that. What is the Buddha's special teaching on the ending of suffering? What's the verse, the sort of magic verse that will end my suffering? If I just get this verse and just keep chanting it, reciting it, I'm going to end my suffering. So what is it? What is it? And the monks laugh because they always say, well, it's just recite these words every day. I am of the nature to age. I have not gone beyond aging. I am of the nature to sicken. I have not gone beyond sickness. I am of the nature to die. I have not gone beyond dying. Separation from all I love and like is assured. It will come to me. Very simple little recitation to learn and then bring up every day. And this also will bring you mindfulness and awareness and it'll shorten the length of stay of your impure consciousness in samsara. By reciting this verse, it's bringing you mindfulness to the very basic fundamental problem of human beings, is that we are all subject to aging, sickness and death. Life is impermanent. Life is something that's subject to change. It's not constant, it's not lasting. And where we see that in the most direct way is in our own mind. No thought stays more than a moment, does it? You know, what tricks us about thinking and the arising and ceasing of different thoughts is the continuity in the mind, the memory of past experience of this body, this mind, who we are, our personality and so on. We keep carrying it around. We're attached to this body, mind, as self, and we keep carrying around the sense of self. But as you practice mindfulness, you're interrupting this sense of self, interrupting the process of craving, attachment, becomings, and self arising. So the times when you're deluded get less, shorter, briefer, and so the amount of suffering you experience in the mind becomes shorter and briefer. To the point where someone like Ajahn Buddhadasa, it's just not coming up anymore. He still has a body, so he lived to just over 80 years old, and he had pain and suffering for sure. We know because we used to visit him regularly. But his mind was free from that. His mind was equanimous, free from the suffering of life, because he maintained his mindfulness and this insight into the process of suffering and the ending of suffering. Seeing is just seeing, hearing, just hearing, tasting, just tasting. Not letting his mind fall into craving, the liking, the disliking, and forming clinging and attachment, identifying with experience all the time, creating a personality, a self out of experience. Seeing these, experience it from a place of detached awareness rather than always, this is me, this is mine, this is myself. When we suffer, what is this suffering? It's really the mind, the untrained mind, grasping hold of whatever the experience is with a sense of self. So if it's pleasant, we want to carry on with that pleasantness and hold on to it. So the self starts to get afraid it will lose that pleasure and it will be gone. Or if it is gone, the pleasure turns to disappointment. So then we go seeking more pleasure, more happiness. And all the time it's just going on like this because of this sense of self and the continuity of our perceptions, our thoughts, the trains of thought, the stories we get caught up in and build up in our mind. It's like one long soap opera. This is why people love soap operas. It takes them out of their own soap opera so they can look at someone else's life and think about that for a while. It takes us out of the pain of our body, the pain and suffering of our daily life, and then we can get lost in someone else's problem. And then when we have had enough of that, we can just turn it off. And it's like, that's good. Oh, that was interesting. But now I've turned it off. We feel like we're in control. If you could practice mindfulness to the point of Ajahn Buddhadasa's level, then you could do the same with your own personal soap opera. That sense of self would just go to cessation all the time. It doesn't mean to say you stop functioning as a human being, you don't feel anything or see anything, but the sense of self that forms disappears. It's just seeing, hearing, tasting, touching, smelling, knowing with the mind. You see this quite often at this time where there's a lot more news about illness in the world because of COVID and how people are dealing with it. And you see those people who have some understanding of Dhamma, their mind is more in a wholesome state, they're developing skillful Dhammas, they have been doing that in the past and they know how to do it. Well, they may still get sick with COVID, maybe even seriously sick, but the mind doesn't get sick with it. They understand the mind you can keep in a wholesome state even when the body is sick. If you're unfortunate enough to catch COVID, even though you may have serious symptoms, painful symptoms, life-threatening symptoms, if the mind is in a wholesome state, it doesn't have to suffer with those symptoms. But then the opposite is, what's that? Well, some people don't have COVID, they're still perfectly healthy in their body, but their mind is all over the place and they're depressed, angry, suffering in many different ways. And you see these two extremes in the world all the time. The one who has a wholesome state of mind and is developing wholesome Dhammas, they deal with suffering better. One who doesn't look after their mind, hasn't been developing wholesome Dhammas, they meet with suffering and they don't know what to do. They attach, they cling to that suffering with this sense of self, so it drags the mind down to depression, fear, anxiety. Teachers like Ajahn Buddhadasa, Ajahn Chah, like anyone else, they had to go through old age, sickness and death. But you never detected much suffering in their mind because they trained to keep their mind wholesome, to be mindful of what's going on, of the feeling, the changes in the body, the mental states arising, and they're not getting caught into craving and clinging. They're letting go. But the unenlightened person, unless they receive good training or start practicing, they always cling to their experience. So every bit of pain becomes not only physical, but it becomes mental as well, because we identify it with it. Someone was telling me they really want to get a vaccine for COVID, but they're so scared of the needle. They have to weigh up the fear of COVID with the fear of the needle. And they say sometimes the fear of the needle wins. Just that tiny little prick from a needle is still enough, because they identify so strongly with it, they don't want it, they don't want to face it. Suffering is like that. Even the smallest bit of suffering can ruin our state of mind. Just a few words from another person, negative words, critical words, just unpleasantness, and the mind takes it on board and reacts with aversion, and gets caught up into that for maybe many minutes, hours, days, and we can remember it maybe for years. We can remember a few words someone else said. It kind of poisons the mind with anger. The one who's mindful, it's those words still happen, they still come to their ear, but then they let the whole process drop and it's just hearing. They know the meaning of the words, they know all the unpleasant words, but they don't take those words up with anger. They let it just be sound dropping away. This is how we practice in daily life. Daily life brings us a whole range of pleasant and unpleasant experiences. What did the Buddha encourage us to do? Is to meet them with mindfulness and drive a wedge into this process of dependent origination, paticca samuppada, drive a wedge between feeling and craving. So feeling arises, the unpleasantness of those words of that person, you feel it, but you don't let craving form and react with anger, aversion, anxiety. That's where mindfulness is cutting off the whole process, the round of birth and death. It's literally like a wheel on a bicycle, isn't it? You have a bicycle where if you stick a stick in the spokes of the bike, it stops. That's what mindfulness does. It's stopping, but it's stopping in a good way. It's stopping the process of suffering arising and taking over the mind. And it's reducing your future lifetimes of suffering, less and less. The more you bring up mindfulness, the less suffering you're going to have to experience in the future. So it's a great blessing to know these teachers, even if they're gone now, they're not alive now, but you can read their books and these things are explained very well to them, and their students are still around who are practicing this and have found good results from it. So maybe for tonight I'll just say this much, these words of encouragement to you in your practice, and in a moment there may be a chance for some Q&A.